Okay. Welcome, everybody, to our session on embracing diverse Jewish voices in academia. Before we start, I just want to let everybody know that you are being recorded, and so that this session will be available later for people that want to watch it and couldn't be here now. The purpose of our panel today is to discuss how Jewish students can be encouraged to bring their diverse ethnic, cultural, and religious experiences into both the classroom and the broader collegiate experience. We hope to leave you with some strategies for welcoming Jewish voices into academic settings. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions, and then each of our participants will share their vision for building an inclusive environment. I'd like to introduce our panel and briefly, and then we'll get started with the questions. So we have Vivian Cohen, who's a student at Brooklyn College. We have Dr. Fleurette Cohen, who's a professor of psychology at the College of Staten Island. We have Dr. Ilya Brotman, who's the executive director of Hillel for several CUNY campuses and some other campuses in New York City as well. We have Dr. David Brodsky, who's an associate professor of Judaic studies at Brooklyn College. We have Dr. Steve Greenbaum, who's a distinguished professor of physics at Hunter College. We have Dr. Heath Grant, who's a professor of criminal justice at John Jay. And we have Dr. Azrael Ganaf, who's also a distinguished professor of physics at Queen College. So I'd like to lead off by throwing a question out to the panel. How is Jewish identity unique? And how can instructors and others welcome diverse Jewish student identities and ethnicities into the classroom? David, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I hope my internet isn't unstable, and just let me know if it is.
You're fine. I will let you know.
Yeah, so you know, Jewish students, especially Jewish students coming from, you know, a Jewish day school or, you know, having studied Talmud, right? There's a culture of studying in pairs, very active engagement in study, right? So when you study in pairs, you're forced to really read, analyze a text together. These texts are often very hard to figure out, and so your team, team-based learning is a new in vogue mode of learning. So they're already, you know, kind of taught in a very ancient mode of team-based learning, and usually you don't understand the text the same way because it is so difficult to figure out. So you're used to kind of challenging your partner as to, you didn't understand it that way, you read it differently, and it's actually very acceptable to challenge somebody else, politely, obviously, but to challenge them and say, no, I don't understand it that way, I understand it this way, right? And that's very much part of the culture, and it brings a real richness to the table, when you know how to harness it well, I think, right? So yeah, I think that's something that students really bring.
Yeah. Thank you. And Heath, could you talk a little bit about how we can encourage students to be open about their Jewish identity? You're muted.
I think you can't unmute. A lot of us are having trouble once we mute, unmuting again. Maybe we should just all stay unmuted. Those of us, try to unmute yourselves now and stay unmuted.
I'm sorry, Catalina, can you unmute Heath, please?
Got it, I think.
Yes.
Mary?
Yes, we can hear you.
David focused on correctly the positive aspects of uniqueness in Jewish identity. One of the harder aspects to manage is it's an identity that's can be isolating just in the fact that you're not seen. You can immediately be identified as Jewish. In my experience, as a Jewish faculty member that wears a kippah, so I actually bring that identity out. It really surprised me to see on a campus where most faculty do not share their identities in that way, and this is well before sort of the recent days. I was startled to see how many Jewish students from other classes would be coming up to me, almost needing a sense of belonging or connection. And I feel that's something, hopefully in today's discussion, as we go further, we can bring more to the surface, because it ultimately plays a very, very important role in social and emotional development and mental health, which I'll speak to in a later question. But I just worth bringing to the surface now, I feel.
Okay, thank you.
Can I
So,
add a quick
please.
thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
So we unfortunately talk about this amazing diversity that we have in the Jewish community on our campuses, especially at CUNY and at many of our campuses. They're very different from the places that maybe many of us went to school, where the Jewish community is very homogeneous and looks the same way and belongs to the same kind of background. Here at CUNY, at Baruch College, John Jay, and City, where I work, there's a huge group, maybe about a quarter of the students come from the former Soviet Union background. So they have this incredible story of Exodus as we are about to celebrate. And then there's a great group, about 10 to 15% of Persian students who are coming from that background, where their parents came in 1979, from that Exodus and that experience and who they are and what does it mean to be a Mizrahi Jew, an Eastern Jew, a Middle Eastern Jew, and Syrian Jews who are Arab-speaking Jews, theoretically, from their parents. So when you add those communities who are first-generation American college attendees, they really add so much, not just diversity, but richness, as we all said, to our Jewish experience. We often tend to throw this one identity out there for Jewish young people and others as white European type of people who are maybe third, fourth generation here in America. That's very much not true for the majority of our students and probably faculty at CUNY. And that is something that is unfortunately not as told, as promoted, as engaged in our classrooms, and I think that's such a richness that we can share. And just to add to what Heath was saying, since October 7th, I started wearing a kippah all the time in the class and others, and I've noticed how many non-Jewish students have asked me, what is that? Why is that? What's going on? What is the story? And that has added and allowed me to give that special perspective. So all of our identities in this room, especially, who have these beautiful, deep, intersectional identities from all these different places, we need to share it. That's an opportunity for us as educators to bring that into the classroom and allow the voices of the Jewish students who might have those incredibly unique identities to share those in the classroom as well.
And absolutely. And I think, inviting that into the classroom is really important. Vivian, you had a story about an art class with an art professor. If you could share that with us from the student perspective.
So this semester in Brooklyn College, I decided I would take an art class. And walking in, I didn't think I would be sharing any of my Jewish identity. It's not something that I'm looking to put everywhere because I don't feel so comfortable. And so the first class went by, and then the second class went by, and the professor came up to me and he said, where did you come from? And I was nervous to tell him I came from a Jewish day school, I was gonna tell him the name. And then I told him, and he was like, oh, my daughter went there. And it was so important for me. It was so helpful for me to hear from him that he was interested, even if he hadn't been Jewish. Just the fact that he came up to me and asked me, where did you come from? What's your background? It opened the door for me to feel comfortable expressing myself now in this class. Had he not done that, I'm not sure that any of my paintings would have included something that's so important to me. But because this professor went out of his way to invite the Jewish voice, or any voice, I think it's important for any culture to feel comfortable expressing themselves.
So the fact that professor invited your voice allowed you to express your Judaism in your artwork. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you. So David, you also had a story about classroom exercises and identities, and a student who told you something that was a little problematic.
Yes, it's actually an old friend of mine who is a graduate student in CUNY in social work, and they were doing they had to they had to talk about, each person had to talk about kind of their own background and and their identities and whether they had privilege or didn't have privilege. And he was gay male, who's the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. And his experience very much was, I mean, very viscerally of a lot of oppression that both his family had experienced and that he personally had experienced, and that, you know, particularly the Holocaust survivor, you know, grandchild of Holocaust survivors, really, like, I mean, I think all of his grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and he really had it. He was told he was not allowed to identify in those ways, that he had to identify as a white male oppressor, and that was what he needed to, you know, to kind of connect, you know, that he needed to acknowledge. And he was like, well, but that's not my personal experience. Why are you, you know? So it's interesting that, like, we Jews often get told what our experience is, right? Whereas we don't get asked what our experience is, right? And I was, you know, I was kind of commenting that just before this, that I myself, as a tenured professor, got told just a few days ago in a talk, that I also, you know, that when I mentioned, well, what about, where do Jews fit into this? And I mentioned some of the ways in which we get oppressed. I was told I was a white male oppressor. I got told the same thing, right? And that I had no place speaking or even asking a question, you know, in this space. So you can imagine if I, as a tenured professor, get shot down and told I have no place to even ask questions or speak, right? I mean, literally, I got told I had no place. You know, I was not allowed to take up any space in this place, as what, you know, because of the identity that was, and I identified myself as Jewish. I didn't identify myself as white or male. In fact, we each at the thing had to go and put on a tag saying what gender identity we had. I chose not to choose a tag. I just didn't choose any. But so this person put on me what my race. I don't personally identify as white. I do recognize that I'm white presenting. I don't deny that, right? And that gives me certain privileges, but I don't personally identify as white. They could have asked me why. You know, but we often get told what our identities are rather than asked, something that wouldn't usually be done to other groups, right? They wouldn't.
And that's a great lead-in to the next question. You know, the idea that our identities, we can't choose our own, but they're put upon us. So I'd like to ask the question and throw it out to Florette first, but I would love to hear from both Sarah Lee and Vivian and the rest of you about this. So what harm is caused when Jewish students feel they need to hide their identity? And how does this affect learning from a socio-emotional perspective?
Well, from a psychological perspective, our social identities are very important to us. So they're a part of us, right? We take a lot of pride in our social identities the same way we would take pride in anything individual about us. And we spoke about uniqueness before. What's really unique from a psychological perspective about being Jewish is that being a Jew isn't just about a religious identity, right? You've got a religious identity, of course, but then there's also this racial identity that has been put upon us. And then there's also this national identity that's been put upon us. So from a social identity perspective, being a Jew is very, very important. And when a person is not allowed to express their social identity or something that gives them pride, there's an anxiety that develops, right? Students can become anxious. They can become depressed. They could feel isolated, right? We're, you know, as a social psychologist, I tell my students all the time, we are social beings. We do not exist in a vacuum. We need other people. And to feel like we're all alone, especially in a classroom filled with diverse students, that we can't express our own uniqueness and our own diversity is very problematic. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, right, that being squelched and forced to kind of diminish ourselves. So Sarah Lee, allow me to introduce another one of our panelists, Sarah Lee Cohen, who's an engagement associate at Hillel at Brooklyn College and a recent graduate. What do you think?
Current student.
Oh, sorry, current student. I'm sorry, current student. So please, yeah.
Sorry for being a few minutes late. There was some technical difficulties on my end. I apologize.
It's you're here now. It's all good.
I'd say that I think from a personal perspective, it's you as a student when you walk into a room, there's this idea of, well, how will I be received? And I think that there's something very unique about being Jewish in terms of how it's manifested with like racism or anti-Semitism and things like that. For most other minorities, if someone is racist, you can see that, right? Because it's very much in the color of your skin. And I think for majority of Jews, especially those of us who are white passing, you live in this fear of like, when do I share what I am? Will I be welcomed? Will I not be welcomed? Will this person continue to stay my friend after they learn who I really am? And so I think that very much what Florette was saying before, there's this anxiety and fear. It was a very interesting conversation I had with one of my friends who's Dominican. He was like, oh, well, you know, all of this racism and what it looks like and how it's manifested to me. And I said, yeah, but at least you know at face value whether or not you'll be whatever, and you don't live with the fear of then losing people that you cared about in your life. And he started to see that as we became friends, how I interacted with other people and when I would share when I was Jewish and when I wasn't. And so I think that there's this constant fear of, okay, am I safe to do this here or am I not?
That's an excellent point. Heath?
No, I just feeling what was just said. I actually had an experience with a student in one of my classes that was Jewish, and it was almost like a coming out experience, just like you're describing. And I said, oh, well, you should become involved in our halal group. And he said, oh, I can't do that. We get bullied. Not by halal, but by identifying, putting myself out there as a Jew in that way, I will be bullied, and I think it just speaks to what Sorelli's saying, and it's a very important point of this whole discussion. And just to stress what Floretta was saying, social identity, positive connection to social identity, it's unequivocal in the research that it's if I have a positive identification, I have increased self-esteem, life satisfaction. If I don't, if I'm having to hide it, my attachment to a group, obviously high rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicidal ideation. So it's a very serious spectrum of what can happen when we're forcing any group, but here we're speaking primarily about Jewish students, when we're forcing that down. And so very much from a pedagogical standpoint, we need to be thinking about ways to increase that sense of belonging for all of our students and exploring that in questions. And it's not about wearing a kippah or bringing in religious teachings or anything like that, as others have said. It's just positive connections to identity.
It's allowing people to fully be themselves and welcome that.
%.
So, Vivian, it looks like you had something to share, and then Ilya has a story.
It's nothing really new, but just when I reflect on this, I think it all depends on how tight you hold your identity. And to me, I'm first and foremost a Jew. So everything that I learn, everything that I experience always ties back in some way to the Jewish narrative and to my history, my traditions, and everything. So if I don't feel comfortable to be that part of me, I'm not me. So if in a classroom, I would love to tie in this psychological term to something that I experienced as a Jew, and I'm not able to do that. I'm not able to put my best foot forth, and ultimately then I'm not being able to give the most back to the environment that I'm in.
Yeah. Florette?
I just want to add something, because I understand what both Vivian and Sarah Lee are saying. I think that when you have a strong Jewish upbringing, like a day school, right? As I do, and these young ladies do, you're much more tied into your identity, and you might be a little bit also more brazen about speaking your mind. I think the danger starts to come in when you don't have as strong a Jewish identity. Your Jewish identity is there, but it's not the most important identity you've got. And that's when you might start shrinking back a bit, and it might become problematic. Do I say, don't I say, do I say, don't I say? Some people, regardless of how white they look, are very obviously, brought up with a strong Jewish identity. And as somebody else who's brought up with a strong Jewish identity, you could kind of spot those people a mile away, right? So whether you identify as or want to identify as openly or don't want to, you kind of get that sense, right? It's those students, I feel, that are somewhere right on the cusp that are really, really struggling.
I'm sorry, it's a really good point, although I think, with both Vivian and Sarah Lee, it said that even for them, even coming from a strong Jewish identity, there's a fear of being able to speak out. But I want to let Ilya tell his story
Sure.
about classroom experience, because I think it'll help illuminate all of these points.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, I teach in John Jay and Baruch, which are very different experiences. But at John Jay, there are certain faculty members that create an environment in the classroom that disallows a certain voice to be able to be brave enough to speak out. So in one of these classrooms, and the course is called victimology, just to start with, so we understand where the course goes. There are 2 Jewish students in the class, and the whole course has been really driving this semester in a very specific direction, and it's been very difficult for them to speak out. One of them has been hiding his Jewish identity. The other one was brave enough to speak out to the professor and say, really, this is unacceptable, what goes on here, because it really, first of all, is biased specifically and unfactual, and but also it makes me feel very uncomfortable to be here. And he said, okay, like that's he berated her for hours about this and made her feel even more uncomfortable. And she demanded that there would be a different side to the story to present it in this classroom, which was super amazing. And I got involved because I know the student, and I started forcing myself into the classroom to this professor to try to present a different view. And he allowed for me to come last week to the classroom, and I presented a very gentle framework of how we can think about this diversity of opinions and complexity of who we are. And instead of allowing students to speak, which was the plan all along for this class, and to have a discussion, all the students were prepared ahead of time to be incredibly negative and antagonizing towards me. And they, were really nasty and virulent towards me as another professor from the same school. And then he, instead of allowing for the conversation to occur, he prepared a whole array of negative statements and evidence, as he thought it would be, to berate me and to diminish my identity as a Jew. And he even said, "But you're a Jew," he screamed in the classroom. What opinion could you have as a Jew in the classroom? And these students who were there, 40, 30 students, they felt unbelievably enthralled and emboldened to feel a certain way, while the 2 Jewish students felt unbelievably attacked. And the one Jewish student who felt so finally that there's a Jew in the classroom presenting a certain point of view, he took out his Magen David to show me, like, come on, I'm with you, and then he put it back away. And it was such a tough moment to see these Jewish students. And as I walked away from the classroom, all the students clapped, as in to say that they have defeated me. They have defeated this, this oppressor who came to the classroom to present a certain point of view. And that was so unbelievable and unfortunate. And yes, there is a case now open against this professor, and and the Title VI going on and all of that. And it's very unfortunate that they had to present that and to do that in this classroom. But the most important part that I feel very bad about is for the students who are there, not the Jewish students, of course, the Jewish students, but for the non-Jewish students who sat there and now are further emboldened to believe this point of view. And its credibility that this individual has created for them is probably not going to be able to be broken in this semester. So we're really leading this classroom experience towards the climate that we all are so afraid of.
And it's challenging, right? So it comes from faculty, and it's the only heartening part of your story, other than you went there and probably really made the Jews and the other students who maybe were Jewish allies but would never be able to say that in that classroom, feel stronger. I want to just put a pin in that.
Can I add a quick can I add a quick point, which is, I think there's a notion in some, no, thanks, but I think there's a notion for some people that you need to silence certain voices in order to make space for other voices. And definitely I would say as a classroom manager, I consider myself as a professor to be a classroom manager, you do need to make sure everyone gets to speak. There's no question about that, right? But I would say that what I've found is when I activate or facilitate my Jewish students who come with a real culture of participation, right? Well, one of the biggest problems, because I've observed a lot of classrooms, right? And one of the biggest problems we have in classrooms is that students are shy and they don't speak, right? And so often we just don't get student participation. They sit back and they listen, right? If they're even listening, if they're not just on their iPhones and their computers pretending to take notes. And when I observe, I sit in the back and I see they're actually they're scrolling through Instagram, they're distracting themselves with other things, right? So getting that engagement is so important for their education, right? And when I allow my Jewish students to start, right, when I create an atmosphere where my Jewish students start speaking up and questioning and challenging, it's contagious. And the whole classroom starts jumping in and this one and that one, right? And it really adds to, and what I hope our colleagues would understand is when they stop shutting down Jewish students from participating, right, and they facilitate and allow it, really brings in a richness to the culture that the other students learn from as well, and then start to join in on. And so it's a win-win for everyone. But you do have to manage it and make sure one or two don't dominate, obviously, that conversation. Yeah.
No, of course, yeah. But I love the idea that what the Jewish students bring to the classroom is this culture of discussion and challenge and argument, and that properly managed, all students can engage in that. I want to hold both what you and Ilya said and put a pin in it for a second, because I want to ask about Israel and how we can, and these are questions for Ozzy and Steve, who are both distinguished physicists, that, Israel is clearly one of the leading countries in the world when it comes to scientific advances. But when you bring up even, the mention Israel in a classroom, you can get some pushback. So how can we integrate leading advances in all of the sciences that come from Israel? And either Ozzy or Steve, please.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Well, I'm privileged to have had a long-term relationship. Currently work with or have worked with some of the leading institutions in Israel, or I dare say the world, including the Weizmann Institute of Science, Tel Aviv University, and Technion. First of all, at our peril, we ignore the tremendous scientific advances that have come out from all areas affecting us: drug design, climate change, renewable energy, and which happens to be my field, and also the startup culture, which we can learn a lot from. I mean, Israel has been called the startup nation famously there are more startups than in South Korea, and this is not per capita. This is overall. So there's a lot of things we could learn from them. And one other point I want to make is that people who use the term apartheid in terms of trying to apply that to Israel, at least in the educational part that that I know very well, people that use that term are badly misinformed. Okay, as I said, I've worked with some of the leading institutions, and there are lots of Arab-Israeli grad students in the top fields, very competitive fields, and they get jobs. Okay, so all that stuff is not true about Arabs being second-class citizens, at least not in higher education. So that's my comment.
Yeah, I'd say that in the field of medicine, Arabs are overrepresented in the population, even though Jews are famously interested, involved in medicine. They're very welcome, and any visit to any hospital is an experience of people working together. I think that a lot of the discussion we hear about the hostility towards Israel and Jews is in the humanities and social sciences. It's not something that we hear so much about in the sciences. So the turmoil at MIT really did come as a shock to me. So at the City University, we organized a symposium. This is the inaugural symposium of the Advanced Science Research Center, which was there's actually a conference on the U.S. Middle Eastern involvement in photonics. And many people felt it was the outstanding conference that had occurred in photonics because everybody wanted to be involved, because the idea of science stopping at the border is inimical to science. And it would be the death knell of science if one attempts to boycott one or another country. And so that we really had everyone very anxious to come in and be involved. And it was a great success. And I have to say that the City University was very instrumental in helping us in every way. And we hope to hold another such conference in the not too distant future. I want to say something about the discussion that was held before. I think it's important to recognize that students come into the City University with prejudices and biases, and it's a job of the City University. It's part of its role to work against this. I think that a friend of mine, who's a philosopher, said that people, as they mature and grow, they assume many new roles and new beliefs. But there's certain about things that they like, but about things that they don't like or abhor, those don't change, but they can change if there's a concerted effort. So it's not just a question of letting things ride as they are, but I think the university really has to recognize that there's this built-in bias, and it really, part of maturing is to recognize one's own biases and try to learn about the other. And I hope this is part of the educational process. I hope it will be seen and taken up.
No, thank you both. I think, one idea of, perhaps promoting like integration in Jewish identity simply through scientific conferences where people are there to exchange ideas. And, I like that, knowledge doesn't stop at the border. But I'd like to throw out the question to the group in general that, Ozzy brings up. So what is the role of academic administrators and DEI units in fostering the inclusion of diverse Jewish voices in the classroom and beyond the classroom? What do we want our admins to do? Florette, and I'd love to hear from everyone on this.
So we've amongst ourselves had the conversation that DEI has really not catered to Jewish faculty or Jewish students, which in itself has been a problem. If you look at it from the larger perspective, if we want to talk about the classroom, so I teach a class called The Psychology of Prejudice and Social Identity, and it's very near and dear to my heart. I've been teaching this class for the past 16 years, pretty much since I entered the system. And it also counts as credit for what we used to call pluralism and diversity. So anyone can really take the class. I think this is a class that should be, in a sense, or something like it, mandatory. What I do is I teach the psychology behind prejudice and explain to everyone, as Ozzy said correctly, that we all come in with prejudices, whether it be from home, from social media, from our peers, from any place, right? We all come in with prejudices. And once we understand that prejudice serves a psychological need, then we can actually stop for a minute and think about it. And I tell my students, if you say you're not a prejudiced person, you're either lying to me or you're lying to yourselves. And they all look at me and they give me this stare. And then I say, look, that's okay. That's okay. It's part of human nature. It serves a psychological need. What we're going to do is talk about a lot of different topics and a lot of different theories and a lot of different prejudice. And everyone in the class should speak up. But when you speak up, you could say pretty much anything you want as long as you do it with respect for your fellow students. And once they learn how to do that in the classroom, I've been contacted by former students that told me that this carried on with them forever, right? Once we start a program like this in the classroom, it becomes ingrained in them. Okay, we understand we've got prejudice, but you know what? Stop and think a minute. Think about the stereotypes. Think about who you're looking at. Think about the jokes that you're making. Think about how you wouldn't want to be the victim of prejudice. How would that make you feel, right? And all of a sudden it opens all these new doors. So I really think that's something that should be probably ingrained into every curriculum, regardless of your major and regardless of your school and your academic background.
And I would argue is training for the faculty and administration as well to really understand the psychology of it. Other thoughts on what we can do, what we can ask of our administrators and DEI units?
I love everything that was just said, but I won't echo Florette again as I did last time. But in addition to that, I think it's making sure administration, either through faculty training or whatever it may be, recognizes the complexity and intersectionality of the Jewish identity that we're talking about, and holding a space for Jewish identity as part of the DEI discussion to begin with, which it's pushed down for the reasons we said before, the idea of whiteness, etc. We've never really been looked at as part of that diversity in that equation. So I think the more we can do to bring that to the surface, particularly in DEI units, the better. And it's not always Jews, and I mean, sometimes it's worth having the attention discussion on Jewish identity, and we lose that. I don't know if I'm making sense in saying
Yeah,
this.
you are. So essentially, step one is for the institution to acknowledge that we're an ethnic group
First,
and that we are like a legit. I think.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the university also should recognize that there are many centers within the universities, within CUNY, which are specifically hostile to Jews. I could name them, but there's no point here. There should be an effort to set up an institution where the story of Judaism, of Israel, and of the bond between Jews and their impact on the general culture and on the U.S. Can be told.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on this, Ilya? And
So
then
I think I think there's a lot to speak of course, and DI mechanism, the whole system has majorly failed us in this past year, has really shown us that ultimately the Jewish people are excluded from this whole framework for multiple reasons, and one of it being the things we said, the whiteness and the privilege and all of these issues. And in what happens to Jewish students when they come, Jewish faculty to DI and ask for certain things, what we face is not just a lack of understanding and ignorance and inability and competence and all of those things that unfortunately occur at our schools. There is this lack of ability to move forward, to say, oh, there's nothing we can do. Freedom of speech and all other issues prevent us from even addressing the possibility of any kind of change. And an example would be the apartheid walls, right, that appear on our campuses, which make extremely hostile environments, very open, physical, visual, imagined experiences for our students and for all students. And it's an educational tool, which is completely unfacilitated and has the ability only to create hostility, intimidation, harassment for students. And when we say to them, wow, isn't this unbelievable? Isn't this, really unfortunate? You can stop it. You don't have to put up this wall. If this wall creates an environment of hostility, why would you put it up? And when we say to them, would you put up a KKK wall, right? A white supremacy wall? They are forced to say yes, right? Which obviously they would not, right? It would be not something we would all ever want to see on any of our campuses. But I think there is a misnomer and a very difficult misunderstanding about what freedom of speech is on campuses, what conduct unbecoming is, what we are all searching for in creating a climate of civil, regular human decency and engagement and interaction, and what we're talking about with academic excellence, when we are all trying to build a classroom where we are focusing on growth and not on aggrandizement and diminishment of certain people.
Yeah, Matt, it's another excellent point. Part of which being that the DEI and administrative structures need to understand what is offensive and frightening to Jewish people. David, and then Sarah Lee first. Sarah Lee had her hands up before Sarah Lee, and then David.
Sorry, David. I would add to that, everyone kind of touched on DEI. I would add I mean, I know at Brooklyn College, at least, there isn't any Jewish person working in a DEI office. I don't know what that looks like in other CUNYs, but I think that would be a great start. I and also understanding, yes, there's the idea of whiteness and how that ties into Judaism, but also making sure that Israel is a part of that conversation. A lot of what Jewish students are facing on campus and in the classroom isn't just anti-Semitism with like, oh, horns and being like greedy and money and power hungry. It's very much tied into Israel now. And if you continuously try to separate the two and tell Jewish students that, well, anything related to Israel is a political opinion and has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, you're shutting down and invalidating every experience that a Jewish student has in the classroom. And how do you expect Jewish students to come into report and to feel comfortable and to come to the DEI office when at the end of the day, the administration is telling students, well, we don't really care, and you're going to face these things because freedom of speech. So
Wow. Yeah, so I want to keep going. We could have ended on that because that was brilliant. Thank you. David?
Oh, I thought you were going to end it on.
No, we're
Okay.
not going to end. We could have. I
Okay.
just wanted to say, like, that was, thank you, Sally. That was actually like very well spoken and exactly what needed to be said. David, and then after this, I'd like to take questions from the audience.
So I would say, to be honest, my personal experience with DI at Brooklyn College has been very positive. They've really been willing to listen and to learn from me, you know, and to hear and to grow. What I would say is a few problems. One, we're such a poor institution that we lose our DEI. We've had excellent directors of DEI, and we've lost them each time very quickly. So the turnover is too rapid. I think currently we don't even have an official head of DEI, right? So that right there is a real problem. And then you're really at the whim of, will the next person be understanding? I don't know, right? So that could change things radically. So that's a huge problem right there. But I would say if the fundamental principle following, wait, sorry, I'm getting distracted here by something from my computer. Sorry. If the fundamental principle of that we say is that following Brandeis's position Supreme Court statement on free speech back in 1929, if the fundamental principle is that we don't silence speech, we add more speech to bad speech, then institutions have to put their money, literally their money, where their mouth is, and they have to add speech, right? So we need courses on anti-Semitism. We need professors of anti-Semitism. We need courses on Jewish history so that people understand that Jews are a people, not just a religion, that Jews are a people who have inhabited a certain land, who have, et cetera. We need, so is where there is, oh, sorry, was I going in and out?
For 1 second.
Okay. And we need courses where, where there's real dialogue and with professors who are actually skilled in this, right, to have dialogue on Israel-Palestine. I find, I said, I think I've told some of you this, but I take, for this past entire semester, I take 2 signs out onto the quad during my lunchtime, every time I'm on campus. One sign says, without dialogue, college is upside down. And the other one says, let's discuss Israel and Palestine. And I get a variety of opinions. I get really like a variety of opinions. But what I find is, as long as I set the tone and I make it clear, civil discourse, let's talk it through, let's all listen to each other, give each other a chance to speak and to listen. I get people really open, like from this wide variety of positions, open and hearing and listening and learning and growing, right? And so it can be done, but that takes resources. I do it for free in my spare time. We need to actually hire people who are trained and talented in this, and not from a position that's just going to try to indoctrinate in one side or the other, but to really open up and help people hear each other and learn. And we don't have that being done on campus, mostly because of a lack of resources, right?
And so, right, so putting resources into this, right, training people, because not everybody is trained in how to engage in civil discourse on very difficult topics.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do now is to open it up to the folks out there. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and I will read them for the panel, and then we'll end with the panel leaving us. Each of the panel will leave us with one thought at the end. So please put your questions or comments in the chat, and we'll go from there.
Maybe as we wait for the
So as we
question,
wait for them, yes, I was giving it a second.
right?
Yeah,
I can share like maybe another solution.
Sure, go ahead, share one more solution, and then maybe if there aren't questions, we can each end
Right.
with the key point we wanted to leave. So please, Ilya.
Yes, sure. And you know, we talk, this group talks a lot about what can we do? What are next steps? We always think about this. And you know, I really appreciate incredible bravery that it takes, right, for my wonderful colleague David to be out there standing and accepting and engaging people. And it's wonderful. And I really appreciate it. And I really care so much that we need to create a platform for folks to have this experience. So on our 3 campuses at City, Janjay, and Baruch, we've been running for the past year a interfaith fellowship, we call it Faithful, where about 30 students per semester get together, and once a week they sit together for an hour and a half, they eat together, and they have a conversation. And it's a facilitated conversation, and it's about our commonalities and not our differences. It's about how we communicate, how we pray, how we learn, how we rest, how we eat, how we think of each other. And it's been such an incredible, growth-oriented, successful experience and experiment for the past year and a half, where we've built so many amazing relationships. You know, we had our session last night at Baruch College, and you know, 30 students from different backgrounds, and Bengali and Nepali and Asian and Hispanic and all kinds of students from, you know, all kinds of backgrounds came together and spoke about language and how we communicate to each other, how we can break barriers. And it was so extraordinary. The people were so committed to really belonging to this group, and they've grown in such amazing ways to understanding each other. I've been blessed to be able to facilitate those conversations. And, you know, without Hillel being involved, of course, this fellowship wouldn't occur on these campuses. And, you know, to speaking of the resources, but I always talk to DEI, especially, to say, you must invest in this. This is the whole story. This is diversity. This is inclusion. This is bringing people together in a conversation that fosters incredible growth and discourse that then leads these young leaders to become, you know, spokespeople, catalysts for change across our campuses. And it has happened in a very small way, unfortunately. What can we do with 30 students a semester? We were breaking tiny bit of ice, but it's something that we must do. We have to be brave, as we've been talking about, right? To be able to do it, we have to invest absolutely into it to make it extraordinary. But it takes the commitment on the college's administration to say, oh my God, this is the #1 story. We must invest in these conversations, in building a community of growth, of exchange, and of respect. So we can do it. We just need to invest.
Yeah, I love that, invest in a community. I'm sorry, Fleur, I don't want to cut you off. I will get to both of you. I just wanted to read a few comments. We don't have questions, but so Linda Landsman was very intrigued by the need to have more speech. Marion Levy is amazed at the courage of the panelists. And again, Linda said this session should be required viewing as part of new student orientation. Thank you. And Eleanor is like, your question, Marion, your questions opened up the seminar to, to me, sorry. So basically the panel really opened up a lot of questions. This panel will be recorded. I'll talk to the panelists, and with our comfort level, we will distribute it so we can share it with others. One more thing, we do have an actual question, so ask the question and then take Sarah Lee and Florette's comments, and then we'll end. So William's asking, what specifically can faculty do to facilitate inclusion of Jewish identities in their classroom in lecture-style classes that have no topical relationship to religion, politics, identity, or the Middle East?
Can I add one quick answer to that?
Absolutely.
Really
Yeah, I'll take that, Florette, and then
often a way in which they turn Jewish students off is by then making it, right? And this is making it about the Middle East, because, you know, everyone wants to make things relevant. So they make it about the Middle East when they actually don't know what they're talking about. They don't have the background. And it very quickly, I mean, Sarah Lee, I know you've had a lot of experience with this, right? And so maybe you want to follow up with that, but it very quickly turns Jewish students off and silences them, right? And I hear from a lot of Jewish students, particularly, they're afraid to speak up because they don't want their grade to be affected, right?
David,
So
that's a great
we've had
point.
situations.
I'm
You've
sorry,
had, oh, sorry.
well, we have very little time left, so
Okay, okay, sorry, yeah.
because I want to give everybody the chance for the last comment. Sarah Lee, please.
Sure. So I was going to say, if you're bringing up topics that don't belong in the classroom, right? I think this is very much a problem and something that our student government has also advocated for with administration. Professors shouldn't bring things in that have nothing to do with the topic of discussion of what it is that you're coming and trying to learn, because you signed up for a class and follow the course. And I think that majority of the time when Israel especially is brought up, that turns down students, as David was saying, is something that I've had many experiences with. But I think that if you're bringing things in terms of, oh, well, you know, this was a Jewish person that contributed to, if we're talking about philosophy, then you bring up a Jewish philosopher, and that's how you can tie certain things and see a way that it brings, let's say, Jewishness or Jewish achievements into the classroom without necessarily having to bring in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that's a really big differentiation of how you bring things into the classroom.
And that's a great suggestion. For example, in a science class, the way that we would talk about a prominent scientist and, you know, discuss their Black identity or, you know, their Hispanic identity, to discuss the Jewish identity as well. Florette, you're going to be the last answer to this, and then I really want to get everybody's one sentence takeaway.
Okay, so I just wanted to say a couple of things. First thing is just going back, because I meant to talk about when we mentioned DEI and the fact that we said that there are no Jewish, there's nobody on Jewish, you know, there's nobody Jewish on any of the DEI boards. I'm not sure, but I don't think that's actually true. We had a CSI DEI held a look at anti-Semitism panel back in the beginning of the semester, the end of January. And Sophia McGee came in from CUNY Central, and she is actually part Jewish. It was very near and dear to her heart. President Lynch was very open and honest. We had a very good conversation. And at least at CSI, we're trying to make, DEI is trying to make people aware of the nature of Jewish harassment and Jewish feelings. So I just wanted to give credit where credit is due. As far as going into the classroom in a situation where we're not talking about religion, politics, or identity, there are two things that can be said. One, the psychology department at CSI has a policy not to advocate for anything that has nothing to do with the mission of psychology. So that's one thing that could be stated at the beginning of the class, at the beginning of a semester, which is we're not going to talk about topics that have nothing to do with the mission of this class.
All right,
that
so,
being,
I'm sorry, I have to
yes.
cut you up here because we only have 5 minutes, and at 5
Okay.
minutes. So, but great point. And actually, CSI College of Staten Island could probably serve as a model for some of the other CUNYs as far as how they handle DEI. I'm just going to go around calling on folks as I see them on my screen. So Heath, what is your one point that you would love people to take away from this?
I think model programs like Faithfulness that focus on climate and civility are the way to go here. Students and faculty aren't ready to have those Middle East discussions yet. We have to build.
I like okay, build capacity. Sorry, I'm going to be cutting everybody off here. Ilya.
You said a sentence and I was going into 3, so go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thank you all for being here. I think it takes bravery to see yourself in the other. We should invest incredible amounts of resources to build the opportunities for young people to see themselves in each other.
David.
Yeah, Jewish students, Jewish culture and Jewish education brings, you know, classical Jewish education brings a richness of engagement and analysis, the very things that we're trying to bring into our classrooms. And when you unlock that, it really enriches the classroom, and we should so it's a win-win for everyone.
Ozzy.
So I would say that this question of hostility to Jews or to Israel is not a sidebar to what the university is about, but it's really about the entire trajectory of our civilization. And it's important to really come to grips with it.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Ignoring science and engineering advances coming out of Israel is like cutting off your nose to spite your face. And the other point I want to make is that Arab Israeli students have the same, in higher education, Arab Israelis have the same opportunities that Jewish students have.
Okay, thank you. Vivian.
It's important for students to feel excited to be themselves, and no different is that for Jews.
Okay, Florette.
Embrace diversity in the classroom while stressing the importance for tolerance and respect for everyone.
Okay, Sarah.
Oh, I had so many things as you guys kept going, and now all of them disappeared from my mind.
Oh, no.
Sorry. I would say believe your Jewish students, and for all our DEI offices and for everything like that. When a student is coming and telling you that they faced anti-Semitism, the same way you shouldn't tell us what our identity is, please don't tell us what hatred against us looks like.
Thank you. I want to thank the whole panel. I really appreciate the spirited discussion and the engagement. Would love to thank also want to thank the folks who came today and appreciate your comments. We have literally a minute and a half left, so if there's any last minute comments from the audience, would love to take them. We have such a rich discussion. Thank you, but you guys can all see the chat. We will make this available in some form, and I'll reach out to folks who expressed an interest. So thank you to everybody. I think we'll end here. I think this is perfect.